Behind the curtain of great are the myths. Episode 8. America as Mythological Landscape. Memphis, Miss Porter's, Bryn Mawr, New York, Los Angeles, and the desert. One of the most striking features of Great Are the Myths is that America in the novel is never merely a setting. It functions as a symbolic landscape. Each major location carries its own imaginative and emotional charge, so that geography becomes part of the novel's deeper meaning. Birdie does not simply move through places. She moves through mythic regions. Memphis, Miss Porter's School, Bryn Mawr College, New York, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs are not interchangeable backdrops. They function almost as stages in an inner and cultural journey. The place of origin, the place of formation, the place of intellectual awakening, the place of institutional power, the place of dream production, and finally the place of revelation. The novel therefore participates in a long literary tradition in which landscape is not passive scenery, but an active force in the making of identity. In Great Are the Myths, America is not simply where the story happens. America is part of what the story is about. Memphis, origin, authenticity, and the myth of beginnings. Birdie arrives in Memphis as a 13-year-old English girl sent into a world that feels brighter, louder, stranger, and more open than the one she has left behind. Memphis is her first American landscape, and for that reason alone, it carries enormous symbolic weight. But Memphis also means more than arrival. In the imaginative structure of the novel, it becomes a place of origin myth. It is here that Birdie's friendships form, that the boy enters her life, and that the emotional atmosphere of youth begins to take shape. Memphis is also the place most closely associated with something culturally raw and authentic: music, longing, improvisation, and possibility. It is a city still close to the source. That matters because the boy belongs to Memphis before he belongs to the world. Birdie encounters him in this landscape of beginnings, before he becomes a symbol. This gives Memphis a special status in the novel. It is not only the first setting, it is the place where reality exists before myth hardens around it. In American cultural imagination, the South often occupies a paradoxical role. It is imagined as more emotionally charged, more rooted in history, more haunted by memory, and more musical. The novel draws quietly on this symbolic charge. Memphis becomes both a real place and an imaginative one, intimate, formative, and full of cultural voltage. It is the landscape of first feeling. Miss Porter's School, the landscape of social formation. From Memphis, Birdie moves into another distinct American environment, the world of elite girls' education. She attends Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut, one of the most historically significant boarding schools for young women in the United States. Founded in the 19th century, Miss Porter's has long been associated with the education of daughters from influential families and political dynasties. In the symbolic geography of the novel, Miss Porter's represents the landscape of social formation. At the school, Birdie enters a world where behavior, education, and social expectations are quietly structured. Boarding schools, such as Miss Porter's, historically functioned not only as academic institutions, but as environments where young women were prepared to inhabit particular roles within elite society. Here Birdie begins to learn the codes of a certain American world, manners, cultural literacy, and the subtle rehearsal of adulthood. The emotional spontaneity of Memphis gives way to a more structured environment where identity is shaped by tradition and expectation. Miss Porter's therefore marks a transition in the novel's geography. It is the first environment where Birdie encounters the formal architecture of American social life. Bryn Mawr, intellectual, awakening, and female independence. Later in the novel, Birdie attends Bryn Mawr College, one of the most distinguished women's colleges in the United States and a member of the historic Seven Sisters. If Miss Porter's represents social formation, Bryn Mawr represents intellectual awakening. Founded in 1885, Bryn Mawr was among the first American institutions to offer women an academic education equal in rigor to that offered at elite universities for men. Its culture has long been associated with scholarship, intellectual seriousness, and female independence. Birdie's time at Bryn Mawr introduces another layer to the novel's geography. Here she enters a world where identity is shaped not only by class or social expectation, but by study, conversation, and intellectual exploration. Within the symbolic map of the novel, Bryn Mawr becomes the place where Birdie's consciousness expands beyond the emotional and social structures of adolescence. It represents the possibility of thinking independently, a stage of life where young women begin to articulate their own interpretations of the world. Placed between Miss Porter's and the wider social world of New York, Bryn Mawr functions as a bridge between formation and autonomy. New York, institutions, class, and the architecture of power. If Memphis represents beginnings and the schools represent formation, New York introduces Birdie to the landscape of institutional power. New York carries associations of prestige, sophistication, hierarchy, and cultural authority. It represents the America of systems rather than origins, the world of schools, families, names, status, and legitimacy. For Birdie, movement into this environment marks another shift. Social codes sharpen, class becomes more visible, behavior becomes more formalized. New York therefore represents not spontaneity, but structure. It is where power becomes architectural. The city stands for institutional America, inherited authority, ritual, cultivation, and the codified forms of belonging associated with elite society. In mythic terms, New York is less Eden than Olympus in its bureaucratic form. It is not the paradise of innocence, but the mountain of hierarchy. Los Angeles, surface, performance, and dream production. If New York represents institutional power, Los Angeles represents something far more unstable, the machinery of dreams. Los Angeles occupies a unique place in the symbolic imagination of America. It is the city of reinvention, cinema, surfaces, fantasies, and manufactured identities. It is where private longing becomes public image. Within the imaginative world of great are the myths. Los Angeles represents the logical environment for the rise of modern celebrity. It is the place where myth becomes industry. The boy may begin in Memphis, in the intimacy of local life and raw possibility. But the broader American system that transforms individuals into global symbols belongs to the Los Angeles order, the order of spectacle, projection, image, and endless reproduction. For Birdie, Los Angeles is therefore not merely a city. It is the stage on which human feeling is stylized, lit, framed, and projected outward. If Memphis is the landscape of human beginnings, Los Angeles is the landscape of myth in its most modern form. Palm Springs and the desert, revelation and the inner self. Then there is Palm Springs, and with it, the desert. The desert has always carried enormous symbolic weight in literature, religion, and film. It is the landscape of revelation, testing, purification, and confrontation with the self. Biblical prophets retreat into the desert. Mystics search for truth there. Modern characters travel there when the protections of ordinary life begin to fall away. In great are the myths. Palm Springs functions in exactly this symbolic way. By the time the narrative reaches the desert, the emotional and cultural material gathered elsewhere begins to clarify. The desert strips away social clutter. It offers less architecture, less noise, less distraction. And because of that, emotional truth becomes harder to avoid. Memphis gave Birdie origins. Miss Porter's gave her formation. Bryn Mawr gave her intellectual independence. New York gave her structure. Los Angeles gave her spectacle. The desert gives her clarity. Geography as inner cartography. Taken together, these places form more than a travel route. They create a kind of inner cartography. Birdie's movement across America reflects a movement through different symbolic states. Memphis, childhood and emotional beginnings Miss Porter's, social formation Bryn Mawr, intellectual awakening New York, institutions and class power Los Angeles, performance and myth production Palm Springs, revelation and emotional truth. The geography of the novel therefore becomes interpretive. Birdie does not simply remember what happened in these places. She remembers what each place meant. America as a myth machine. At its deepest level, Great Are the Myths suggests that America itself is a myth-making machine. Not simply because it produces celebrities, but because it turns landscapes into symbols. The South becomes authenticity. New York becomes prestige. Los Angeles becomes dream production. The desert becomes spiritual truth. Birdie's life unfolds inside the symbolic system. Her memories reveal both the seduction and the instability of these myths. The novel is therefore not only about a boy becoming a legend. It is about a country that knows how to mythologize everything: people, houses, cities, landscapes, futures. America in the novel is not neutral ground. It is the great stage on which modern myth is made. Conclusion. To read Great Are the Myths closely is to see that its geography is doing serious symbolic work. The places are not decorative. They are structural. Each region of America gives Birdie a different education, in desire, in class, in spectacle, and in truth. The novel's movement across Memphis, Miss Porter's, Bryn Mawr, New York, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs is therefore not simply narrative expansion. It is a deepening of perspective. Birdie passes through landscapes that are also ideas, and in doing so she learns how myth is rooted not only in people, but in place. America becomes the medium through which memory, identity, and cultural mythology are fused. And that is one of the reasons the novel feels so expansive. It is not simply the story of a girl in America. It is the story of America itself as a landscape of dream, performance, longing, and revelation.